This is the Workplace Podcast with your host, William Corless, brought to you in association with Yellowwood, providers of executive coaching, corporate training and facilitation, your external learning and development partner. Each week, we focus on a different aspect of the workplace. We hear from guest speakers who are subject matter experts and are incredibly talented at what they do. These experts will give you a different perspective and insight to work life, with the aim of empowering you to take a different path to success in all aspects of work life. These perspectives will include career and personal success, leadership, high-performance teams, and creating a better work-life culture in your organisation. Yellowwood. Take a different path to success with your career, team, and organisation.
Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. Our topic today is negotiation through the female lens. Our guest today is Smadar Cohen-Chen. She's currently a senior lecturer in the management department in Sussex Business School, University of Sussex. She received a PhD in social psychology from the University of Sheffield in 2014, and then held a 2-year visiting assistant professor position in the Dispute Resolution Research Centre, the Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern University. Her research focuses on the role of emotions, emotional expressions, and emotional regulation in interpersonal and social processes. This includes conflict resolution, decision-making, and negotiations. Her work is published in high-quality international journals, and she has won a number of awards and grants. Of late, she's been teaching negotiations for 7 years for MBA students, executive postgraduates, and undergraduates. And she has also conducted workshops on cross-cultural negotiation, specifically negotiation for women. Welcome to the Workplace Podcast.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. I'm good.
And we were introduced by your friend and my former tutor from the London School of Economics is Rashpal Denzakalon, which so nicely introduced us. So I was really interested in this topic. I also teach negotiations, and I've always been asked this question. What are the differences between men and women when it comes to negotiations, and what is it women need to know? Are they at a disadvantage? Is there something they need to know? And I've never been able to answer that question. And luckily, I have you here to answer all those questions that I might have. So where's a good place to start then?
I think a good place to start is really how we think about negotiations. We were talking about this a little bit before, but on the one hand, we've got all these depictions of negotiations as, all or nothing, and people coming in, lawyers doing this. So it's really about coming in and being really assertive and aggressive, right? Women are often taught not to do those things, right? Women have stereotypical roles as caregivers, as empathetic, as sweet, as submissive, right? So we're taught not to do all those things. And then on the other hand, right, there's this idea that, you're either good at negotiations or you're terrible at negotiations, right? And it's something that you maybe can't learn how to do. And so there are lots of women out there thinking, oh, well, I'm not assertive. I can't go in and say to a bunch of men, take it or leave it. And, I can't learn how to do it and I can't get better. And so women not only negotiate less, right? They initiate negotiations less. But, they have all these stereotypes, or we have all these stereotypes stacked against us that make us feel like we can't do it.
Is it a little bit about self-limiting beliefs about negotiations? Say, I could never do that. And because of a false sense of maybe what negotiation actually truly is, because what we're exposed to TV or movies or whatever. And then it's a little bit about societal beliefs that, well, this is how we've been parented or raised, and our childhood experiences then informs us not to be assertive. And then I was reading the research. You gave me a lot of research on this, which I must thank you for. One of the parts there's a backlash effect, isn't there? That if women are assertive, then could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So first of all, it's not only self-limiting, right? So it's partly self-limiting, so women initiate less.
Yeah.
But then there's also research that shows that people give offers that are more aggressive to women, also minority members, minority group members.
Yeah.
People who they see as weaker. So there's an actual, right, problem there. But then there's this backlash effect, which is because women are supposed to be, right, sweet and warm and, you know, all these lovely motherly things, right? When they are not, okay, when women step out of the stereotypical boundaries, right, and are assertive, for example, they get punished much more. So words like, you know, bossy versus assertive, right? There's this lovely poster that I love, and it's a little girl, and she's pointing her finger at this little boy, and it says, "I'm not bossy, I have leadership skills." Right? And it's about that, right? It's about people see men and women with the same abilities as very differently, right? So a woman will be seen as bossy, whereas a man will be seen as assertive. When you go into negotiations, right? So maybe an assertive man will lead people to say, oh, okay, he needs to be taken seriously. I'm going to make him a serious offer. Whereas a woman will get an even more aggressive counter offer because, oh, well, she's trying to push me around, I'm not going to let her. And so there's this backlash effect, which is quite interesting, in which women basically can't be seen as both warm and competent, right? It's either one or the other. But leadership roles and also negotiating, there is a very important need to be both warm, so forming positive relationships, and competent, you know, someone that you take seriously. And so there's often, you know, this backlash effect with women negotiators.
So how do we overcome that? I'm just curious. If someone's listening in and it's like, right, I've to manage that balance there, and this is where, is there a bit of emotional labor there where I have to hold back a little bit? Or it seems like men get a far easier ride there, because if I'm going to be assertive, it's a bit like people are going to listen to me without having a negative reaction. Whereas if I'm going doing the exact same thing, there's a negative reaction. How do we overcome that?
So I think there's some really interesting research. So before that, right, when we teach negotiations, we talk about how it's not about being aggressive and taking from the other side, right? It's about listening. It's about thinking creatively about how to address the interests of both sides, right? And there's some really interesting research by Laura Cray and colleagues that says, actually, when you take women and you emphasize, right, feminine characteristics that are good for negotiations. So showing women what type of things that they might be very strong at naturally or socially, right? And saying that's really good for negotiations, then women do much better. So I think it's about not thinking about negotiations as this super assertive masculine art, but actually exactly the opposite. Thinking about negotiation as a science, right? As something that has rules, and thinking about ways in which women or stereotypically feminine characteristics can really help you to be a good negotiator. So when I teach negotiations, I say to students, look, if you're a complete pushover, right, you have to learn to work with it, right? That's what it's going to be, okay? You're going to have to learn how to plan and be super nice, but have very strong boundaries, right? Whereas if you're super aggressive, maybe you could, you need to learn to listen more. So, and the same thing, right? stands when I teach these workshops for women. It's about saying, okay, I am never going to be able to walk into a room full of men. If you can, more power to you, girl, right? But if you feel like that's not something that you can do, right? You can't walk into a room, throw all the papers off of the table and say, this is my first and final offer, take it or leave it. But you can learn how to say, I don't think that'll work for me, right? I really appreciate the offer, but I really can't do that to my family, or I really can't do that to my team. Think about ways in which you can keep your personality and keep what you feel comfortable with as a woman, right? So remain maybe warm, right? But practice those things that are more hard for you. So I have two examples. One is, I know there are lots of men who suffer from this, but I think that it might be something that women suffer from more. It's the terrible, terrible, terrible problem with embarrassing silences. And I'd say practice it, right? Like when you're in a conversation with someone, practice. Take 3 seconds before you answer, right? Because this is something where socially women are expected to be talkative, be sociable, be lovely, be nice, and so when, for example, we make an offer and someone just sits there silently, the anxiety kicks in, right? Oh my God, he doesn't like it. He doesn't like me. He hates me. Oh my God, and instead, right? Just to remind yourself, you made an offer. Now it's time for the other person to make an offer now, right? So get comfortable with that embarrassing silence. I had to practice it a lot. And the other thing is maybe things like, instead of saying no, right, saying yes if, because really, what's the difference between no and then giving a counter offer than saying, yes, if you can do this and this and this, I can do this and this and this, right? At the end of the day, in the negotiation, it's the same thing, but it might be more comfortable for women, and it might not force, a woman to do something that she might get backlash stereotypically from.
What you're reinforcing there is that if you know all the various different aspects of negotiation, so you said about a negotiation tactic like the power of silence, and then the conditional offer, which is the what if, and the counter offer then to say, and it's a bit about trading there. So if we know more about negotiation, then we're not going to fall into that trap that we were talking about before. And then this leads me to a curious question then, because I was looking at the other research then. So there's two different types of negotiation. There's the fixed pie or distributive piece, and then there's the expanding the pie, that integrative piece. So it seems that women are naturally predisposed to do the integrative negotiation. Say, listen, what is going to work for you? And then you're moving into what's your BATNA, your best alternative to negotiate agreement, and your WATNA, what's your worst alternative to negotiate agreement. How does that fit in then with, we'll say, for example, that the research there about those stereotypes buying cars, where it was female or people from mixed race or whatever. How does that fit in then? Here, the negotiation piece, is it kind of know what type of negotiation you're in, or what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think knowing more about negotiation is really important, but more than that, going into somewhere knowing that, this is a distributive negotiation, right? Buying a car is usually thought of as a distributive negotiation, right? You're just negotiating the price, for example, where you are going to be disadvantaged because you're going to get a more aggressive offer because you are a woman. And that, I would say two things. One is it's really important to plan, right? So sorry, but men might be able to just go in and wing it, right? But we need to plan more. We need to come extra knowledgeable of what the actual price is, etc., etc. I would say everyone needs to be well planned, but I think because of this, we're getting more aggressive offers. Women need to be, plan better and have and know what their BATNA is, etc., etc. And the second thing is, okay, so there are very few distributive negotiations that can't be made into integrative negotiations.
Yeah.
Right. So knowing that, and knowing that women are very good at naturally thinking, creatively and being empathetic and thinking about the other side, for example, just saying, look, your price is, not good for me, but right, I've noticed that your reviews are not the best on Yelp or whatever it is, right? How about you take this much off the price, right? And I give you a fantastic review, right? So adding issues to the table, thinking about what the other side might need aside from money, and then tying them together so that it can become an integrative negotiation is something that doesn't necessitate being super assertive or fighting all these stereotypes. And again, if you do want to fight the stereotypes, then that's great. But if you don't want to, there's still a way of being good at negotiations.
It seems to be women still have to work harder. It just seems terribly unfair. And just for our listeners, then the difference between distributive and integrative is distributive is usually a very short-term relationship, a once-off, like a house or something like that. And then in certain situations, a bit like what you were saying there, you could have a long-term relationship with a car to say, listen, I'll buy my next car off you, or I have my car service with you, or I recommend my friends. So there is a certain element of that, of expanding the value there. And this brings me to what you were doing, was bringing the issues to the table. You're able to claim value. Now, notice my segue here. I'm going to talk about claiming authority now. So what are the barriers and opportunities for women attempting to claim authority in negotiations?
It is more difficult for women, right? It is more work. I do want to counter that by saying, I think often it's harder work for men, stereotypically, obviously, at building long-term relationships, right? And thinking about lots of people's interests. Other people's interests. If I had to categorize, broadly men and women, I would say, okay, women would be better naturally at integrative. Authority also comes with feeling comfortable with who you are.
Yeah.
Right. I'm never, I have a squeaky little voice, and I'm never going to come in and have a really deep voice. But because I've learned to be comfortable with who I am, and because I have a lot of knowledge, and I can do it with a little wink, or I can do it with a smile, but I always, I'll call BS, and I'm knowledgeable about what I'm talking about. I can claim authority that way, right? So authority doesn't have to be, again, it's about, socially what we've been taught to think about, do we have power because we say certain things in a very deep voice, or do we have power because we simply have boundaries that we've planned in advance and said, that's just not going to happen. I'm really sorry. I can say that with a big smile. That's just not going to happen. So I think you can claim authority in other ways, but it is about practicing and learning what you feel comfortable with. As women, we have to plan more and practice.
And when I teach negotiations, I often teach about the different types of power, like you have personal power and positional power. Personal power can never be taken away from you. So that's your likability. As we know from Cialdini, it's a huge influence pieces. People like to negotiate with me because obviously I'm interested in their needs and my needs and being a collaborative approach, which is always great to get the win-win. And it's about your personal expertise as well. It's the way that you're actually making that effort as well. So a lot of these things is part of your personal power. And again, you have positional power that people sometimes underutilize, don't they? Your position in the company, your connections, your network. There's so many different aspects of positional power that maybe people don't utilize or leverage enough. Would you agree?
Yeah, there's a positional power. We don't use those enough. But there's also our situational power, right? So having a great partner, a great alternative outside of the negotiation, is an amazing source of power that women can use, right? Because in the end of the day, if you have something better going on outside of a negotiation, then you feel more confident saying, I can't accept that because I've got something better going on, right? I don't think that we capitalize on that enough when we should.
And you mentioned there about vocal tones and body language. I think there's an aspect to that where you need to up your game in terms of your self-awareness, that you know exactly what you're doing with your vocal tones, with your positioning, how you're holding yourself, isn't it? Because that's a real determination to say how confident you are going into negotiation, even if it's a bluff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think people can sense if it's a bluff, but I'm just reminded of this really interesting bit of research that I've read. And that was about the fact that they looked at the word just, who uses it more, and basically found that women use the word in emails, in sentences, use the word just significantly more than men. So I just wanted to ask, right? I was just wondering, just a little thing. Eliminate that word. So it is about thinking about how am I being perceived by the other side, right? If I don't use the word just, if I'm not constantly apologizing for the things that I'm doing, even that little change can, make you feel much more confident, even if you're not throwing things, off the table. And the other thing is, it's about feeling anxiety, right? The unknown makes us feel very anxious. The unknown in something that we feel that we're not very good at makes us feel even more anxious. And so it's often just about, preparation, due diligence, sitting down and saying, okay, these are my alternatives. This is what I want. This is what I'm willing to take on this. This is what I'm willing, just to come in with that sense of reduced anxiety can, make you feel more confident, can make you feel more calm. It's a little bit about faking it till you become it or till you make it. But all those things help, right? Pumping yourself up, saying, you know what, the other side is at the table because they are interested in something, right? What is it? What is it in me that they want, right? Is it my work? Is it, my money? Is it, what is it, right? And how can I leverage that and, make that bigger so that I can get something as well?
I often, when I teach negotiations, I talk about the value of preparation. It's like the amount of time you're going to spend in negotiations should be spending 5 times that amount before you go in. Yeah. And then you're much more confident in your position. You're very clear in your position then as well. And speaking of your position then, what you're talking about there is the words that we use sometimes can weaken or minimize our position by using the word just. And that reminds me of the work of Deborah Tannen, Power of Talk. What's important for our listeners to know about who gets heard and why?
I'm thinking about that in the context of women. There's an importance in what we're saying, how we're saying it, right? Who is basically talking, the extent to what they're saying is important, who's listening to them, right? Are people talking over you, etc., etc.? It's really important to make sure that you are heard, right? That there is that you are not demanding, right? But demanding, right? The listening, the respect that you are due. And women tend to not do that so much. One of my lectures, we talk about, calling out the behavior. Often the power of people who, for example, talk over you or ignore what you're saying or belittle things is in not saying anything about it. And I think, and again, it's about just saying, wait, I wasn't done yet, or you're not really answering my question. So it's about calling people out, I guess, but doing it still in a way that feels comfortable to you, but making sure that, no, you are being heard, right? You are getting screen time, right? You are getting a place at the table, and your interests are being met, right? So it's saying, this is actually what I need, right? These are some of my interests. This is important to me. That might not be to the other side, that your preferences might not be their preferences, but those are your preferences and they are legitimate, right? So it is about making yourself heard, even if it is to yourself first.
It's really about them being respected and placing value on what you have to say, what you want as heard. And that makes me think about, when you're talking about calling out behaviours, then you do that in a way that's assertive in your own style. Sometimes there's subconscious things at play here, and sometimes there's very conscious, deliberate tactics. What are the tactics we need to look out for then, if people are doing that on purpose to maybe sway us in negotiations?
There's research about, people express anger in negotiation because they believe that it's going to achieve more concessions, right? And so, that can be deliberate. And I always think about it, it's like when you're talking to someone who's, my son, for example, right, who's losing it, and you just go into this like very calm mode. I understand that you are very angry, you are very cross, right? But can we think about, so it's about not giving too much attention to this negative behavior, but calling it out so that it's not see-through. Like, I know that you're yelling so that I make more concessions. It's not going to work, right? Please don't yell at me, for example. And I'm always going to bring it back to interests, to how can we work together, etc., etc. Even if, right, it's only to not be pushed around too much. So
again, it's about to name it and to tame it if it's happening. And that brings me to the point then, when you're talking about interests and asking for what they want. I've often taught negotiations, and afterwards when we do role plays or whatever, women often come up and say, I wasn't comfortable in asking. So how can we get a deeper insight into that? What's going on?
That's interesting that you say that. The first few negotiations, the female students, the women, they're like, oh, well, I didn't, I wasn't sure. But once we get to that idea of do some small talk, right? Say, oh, well, what would help you, right? I can see this dawning on them that, oh, I do this all the time with my friends, with my partner, with my children, right? With my colleagues, with my teammates, right? I do this all the time. I'm listening, I'm asking, I'm trying to integrate different perspectives. Do that. Just do what you're good at, right? If you're not good at it, that's fine. Practice. But women naturally do this all the time, socially, right? In your family, then do that. Ask, so what would help you? What would make it better for you, right? And then let the person talk, write it down, and then go, oh, okay, well, that I can do, and that I can do, but then you're going to have to give me this and this, which would make me happy, right? And that part, I think, needs some practice, because that part, I think, is easier for men than women.
And I think as well, a tactic I often heard was time being used as a factor, and then being pressurized into a counter proposal or agreement straight away. I think a useful learning is to say, listen, can I think about that for a minute and get back to you in 5 minutes, or buy time, or ask for more time, or say, listen, yeah, I'm going to explore my options here, and then get the other person then to sweat a little bit.
Again, it's all about that comfort level, right? That I think women have more of an issue with than men. It's saying, oh, well, are you sure about that? Or, I need to check. Or, I need to think about that. Even in job negotiations, right? Women negotiate less than men, right? So people will say, oh, well, the gender pay gap is because women don't negotiate and men do. But those also are prescriptive roles, right? And so saying, taking that second and saying, not, oh my God, thank you so much for the job, I would love to do it. But to say, oh, I need to think about that for a second. And what I would say is do it just once. And then you'll see that the world does not end, right? The first time that I got a job offer, and I was working I was working, my mentor, Jean Brett, right? She was like, don't answer emails for 48 hours. They send you a job offer, right? You just wait 48 hours. It was so stressful. I thought, oh, they're going to write after 5 hours and they're just going to take it back. They're just going to say, oh, well, never mind. And they didn't. It was amazing, right? And that gave me courage to say, well, actually, could we work on this? And could we work on this? And it was always very justified, I'm doing this very well, so I think, this should be my salary, etc., etc. But you only have to do it once and see that it's just a normal part of life to feel like, oh, okay, I can negotiate, right? It is possible. And people expect it and they respect it and it's fine. So, so it's about, pushing the boundaries a little bit, the comfort levels a little bit.
And I think then it's something to do with eagerness then, or eagerness to please, isn't it? Like, I'm trying to understand why we do that, because if you wait for 2 days to respond to an email, that's actually strengthening your position then, because if they approach you then any update, now they're weakening position, now they're showing their eagerness, now you have a stronger position in negotiation, then that leads you then to ask for more and claim more value. So why is it that women don't negotiate for higher salaries or better work conditions or, car sales or whatever it may be? Is it that they see it as rude, or what's going on?
There's, again, that place in society, the stereotypical role of women, which is to please, right? You want to, and it, there's work in developmental psychology about how we teach, we say to boys, be strong, or stand up for yourself, and we say to girls, no, it's nice to share, come on, you want to share all your toys, right? And so women are naturally encouraged in different ways, right, socially, to not demand more, to not be demanding, right? It's kind of even my mother, when she she wants to say something about a little girl, oh, she's very demanding. Why shouldn't girls be demanding, right? So I think, women are encouraged to not be demanding, to not grasp more than they should. And also on an anthropological level, on a societal level, right? This is relatively new, women having careers and all those things. I mean, it's been 2.5, 3 generations. And so if you are offered a job, right, then you take it. Whereas men are more encouraged from childhood to demand more and to ask for more, right? And what's the worst that can happen? They say no, right? And so I think these messages need to be for both genders. This message of be yourself and learn how to work with your personality, it goes for men who are very shy as well.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to make that point there, that sometimes people are listening in kind of going, well, I'm not like that. And obviously we need to differentiate for context. It's not just men and women. Sometimes it's your upbringing, or if you come from an affluent household, that you might be encouraged to do that, whereas sometimes the eagerness to please could be from, just take what you're given, aren't you lucky to get it, from financial security or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and it can also be cultural, right? We know that there are cultures where it's very rude to say no, right? There are all kinds of people groups that can benefit from these ideas, but for me, primarily women, and that is to work with what you have, because it can help you to be a better negotiator, right? Without taking on the entire, feminist movement, or, the goals of the entire feminist movement, right? Just little tweaks here and there can help to make you a better negotiator. But yeah, I think there's a broader context, which is, why do women have to do all these things? And I think, it will take time and it will get better, but in the meantime, we need to do something with it in the meantime.
Yeah. So I'm hearing there's a lot about understanding your negotiation strategy. What are the tactics available? What are your influence here? What's the value that's on the table? What are your issues, their issues? So if you have that good negotiation and commercial acumen, it's easier then obviously to negotiate. And are there any missing links then from today's conversation that we haven't? If there's anybody listening in and then they have a blind spot to their negotiations, especially through the female lens, what are the kind of things they need to be looking out for?
I think a big blind spot for both men and women, but that can benefit women very much, is this perception of emotions in negotiation. I don't know when this became behavioral economics and this whole idea that we are all rational actors and we should be making all of our decisions emotionless, just thinking rationally. But we bring those perceptions into negotiation, right? We are not allowed to feel, we're not allowed to express emotions, we're not allowed to lose our cool. But as an emotions researcher, emotions are very important. They signal things to us and they signal things to others. And I think that right there is one of those things where women have a little bit of an advantage, right? Women are from childhood taught to express emotions much more, to experience emotions much more, to understand emotions much more. So I think, using that in negotiations, using emotional expressions, and relating to people's emotions is not only something that we should all be doing, but women are particularly good at that. and we should be using it much more, right? This idea of empathy is, everybody think, oh, well, empathy, that's just a weak emotional phenomenon, right? No, it's right. It comes from perspective taking. So, if when we say women are very, very empathetic, great, excellent. Sit there for a few minutes. Think about what the other side is experiencing. What do they want from this negotiation? What do they want from you? How is that? So how can we use that to our advantage? There are lots of advantages in utilizing emotions rather than trying to suppress them and push them out of negotiations that I think are really good for women compared to men.
Isn't that great that sometimes a blind spot is a hidden strength or a hidden superpower that we can utilize then in negotiations? And it reminds me of that work by Chris Voss. It's that tactical empathy, isn't it? It's like, what's really important for that person? And sometimes that's where you can spot, this is strengthens my position. To go, okay, and it's that sense of curiosity, isn't it? So it's a bit like what you were saying earlier on. What is it that they find of interest that I have in me, and what do I need from them, So it gives a huge amount of scope. And what are the other kind of, you talked about heuristics or cognitive shortcuts that we do. From a female perspective then, what are the kind of traps? Is it the same for men and women then when it comes to, critical thinking, that emotions can sometimes be signalers or drivers of behavior? Is there something particularly for women that we need to discuss?
I think there are two kind of blind spots, right? One is expressing an emotion that you're not feeling. So really faking it, which can be problematic. So for example, if you're not feeling anger, right? Don't go in and shout at people. Don't go in and shout at people at all. Okay. Let's just not do that anymore.
Yeah, not a good negotiation move.
Yeah. Not a good one, right? But something that women might benefit from is, for example, the emotion of hope, right? So research shows that when people experience hope, they make more concessions, right? And so that's something that I think can benefit women, right? Go in there and show the other side what a fantastic future you have together in this, right? By getting to an agreement, right? So inducing hope in others by helping them to envision a better future of whatever it is, the organization, right? Their position as a leader or a manager can help you, right? So help them to help you by making them feel really hopeful. That I think is something that women might feel comfortable doing, right? Because it comes naturally. And it can be very helpful. Push these boundaries in a way that might feel uncomfortable for some. And the other is indifference. This idea that we want to push emotions out the door, etc., right? Then I'm not feeling any emotion. I'm not experiencing anything related to this. Actually, what we've been finding is that is very detrimental to negotiations, right? To particularly conflict, right? It's terrible for cooperation, and so I think understanding emotions and emotional expressions and how they affect the other side is something that women are very good at and can utilize. Just have to think about it a little bit more.
So when it comes to indifference, say for example, is it indifference if the listeners are tuning into this? Is it that I'm suppressing feelings, or is it that I'm kind of trying to push away emotions that are going to come up anyways? Is that what you mean by indifference, or what do you mean by indifference?
So basically, we differentiated between indifference, which is a non-emotional response or reaction to something that should elicit emotion, compared to, for example, neutral emotion, which is just a state of a baseline, right?
Yeah.
And so, no, it's not about suppressing emotions that are actually there. It's about, just not caring, right? Not having any emotional reaction. And people, if you go on, I know I'm a real oldie because I'm on Facebook. But when people get into fights on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
They will often say to each other, oh, well, you're getting really aggressive and angry. And the other person will say, I'm not angry. I don't care enough about you to be angry. And that always struck me as so rude, right? And just really passive aggressive or aggressive. But people do that in negotiation all the time because they want to, Lee Thompson talks about, right, presenting poise, right, emotion control, all these things. But actually, explicitly trying to present that is really detrimental to negotiations. All of these really interesting findings on emotions and emotional expressions, I think, are a real strong point for women that we're not utilizing well enough, because we've been told that they're actually an encumbrance in negotiation, right? Emotions are terrible for negotiation. You should be thinking like rational men, but no, actually, you shouldn't.
And what I'm understanding then, there's empathy as part of that, a range of emotional intelligence that we can bring in that will drive behaviors and decisions, utilizing those emotions that are similar to what's of importance or value to someone. And then that indifference then could be used as a tactic. Oh, actually, you know what? No, not important to me. Do you care? Actually, genuinely, that's okay. It's not important to this negotiation. Is that what you mean by using indifference then?
So this goes back to like emotion theory, right?
Yeah.
Appraisal theory of emotion says basically you experience emotions about things that are relevant and important to you.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I tell you about someone you've never heard of somewhere else, something happened to them, your emotion will be less strong, right? Or you won't have an emotional reaction. What does that mean? It means that experiencing and expressing emotions in a negotiation signals something to the other side. It signals, this is relevant to me, this is important to me, right? And so, keeping your cool, being polite, for example, right? That's all fine. But explicitly telling someone that you're not having an emotional reaction, right, is basically signaling you're not important. This is not important. This I couldn't care less, right? And that is very detrimental. So saying to someone, look, between these two options, right, I'm fine with both, right? That's not indifference. But saying, I'm indifferent, don't care, right? That's really hurtful. And yeah. So what we found in this paper, sorry, I'm going down the rabbit hole now. So we connected people to heart rate monitors. And then we had them engage in we had them read role materials, et cetera, and then we told them that they could send a message to their counterpart, and they did. And then they received a message, either of just talking about the issue, or a message of indifference. And what we found is that people, their heart rate variation, right? So they had a physical reaction, a negative physical reaction to an expression of indifference. which was, the equivalent of a fight or flight, right? But basically they had a negative physiological emotional reaction to indifference. Indifference can be very detrimental, and in this context at least.
This has been such a fascinating podcast. We have gone from societal beliefs, limiting beliefs. We've talked about negotiation theory and the aspects and the more that you have negotiations there. And again, we've got into emotional intelligence as well. And we talked about different types of power. We've covered a lot in this podcast. I appreciate that so much. And if you were to give maybe some tips then to people just to finish off with, how, what might they be?
Well, a few. I would say, take half an hour to learn the concepts, right? The BATNA, the reservation price, right? And work on your alternatives, because that is the source of power. No matter who is on the other side, if it's a man, if it's a really strong man, right? If you have that wonderful BATNA, right? That alternative outside of the negotiation, that makes you powerful, right? Both situationally, but also that feeling of calm of, I don't really need this, right? I can negotiate, So I think that's one. The other is, utilize what you're good at. So, are you a very emotionally intelligent woman, right? Then use that. Ask people, get information, do that small talk, ask them about different things. It's all good for then going into interest, forming those relationships, right? Growing that pie, creating value. And then I would say just push yourself a little and stay yourself. Okay. So, don't try and be assertive if you're not super assertive. Practice ways of saying no while maintaining what you feel comfortable with. So those are my tips.
Thank you so much for that, Smadar. And if people were to contact you, then how might they do so?
My email, which is s.cohen-chen @sussex.ac.uk. But also my email is online, so you can Google me and find my email on the Sussex website. But I have to say, I'm always really happy to talk to people about negotiation tips and questions, etc. So please feel free to.
This has been a very informative podcast. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, Smadar, and appreciate all our listeners tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Workplace Podcast with your host, William Corless. Our special thanks to this episode's guest for sharing their expertise with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please download and share it. For updates on future episodes and to get in contact with us about any workplace topics, please follow Yellowwood on LinkedIn and Twitter at Different Paths. As always, you can head over to yellowwood.ie for any other information. Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner, provider of executive coaching, facilitation and training. Take a different path to success with your career, leadership, team and organisation.